I'm Rosa and I'm here to talk about books. And more specifically, today I want to talk about A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. Number 3, Lauriston Gardens wore an ill-omened and minatory look. It was one of 4 which stood back some little way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant, melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary, save that here and there a toilette card had developed like a cataract upon the bleared panes. This book is one of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and in fact it is the one where Sherlock and Watson meet for the very first time. They decide to share an apartment because the rent would be too expensive for either one of them to pay alone. And Watson very quickly gets drawn into Sherlock's interesting lifestyle and hobby when they are called upon by the police to investigate a murder. And this murder is presented as the corpse of a man with a frightening expression on his face, found in an empty house. There is no sign of violence on the body of the man, but on the wall of this empty house there is a single word written in blood. This is how the story begins, in which Sherlock Holmes and John Watson discover who the man is and what kind of experiences or deeds in his past made him appear now as the victim of a mysterious murder. Because I consume a lot of media that is based on the Sherlock Holmes stories, I couldn't help to compare the media I have consumed with the story I read in this book. Very specifically, I instinctively compared this book to the first episode of the BBC Sherlock series, because it very closely follows the story, especially the meeting of Sherlock and Watson. And something that I noticed and that made me very happy when reading this book is that Sherlock was so much kinder and softer, even though that sounds kind of cheesy, in the way he handled Watson and other people than I remembered from Sherlock BBC. Even though there was a time in my life where I was a really big fan of BBC Sherlock, and I still enjoy rewatching it every once in a while, there is something that always felt uncomfortable and almost painful to watch to me, namely that the BBC show makes use of a trope I hate very much, and it is the idea that as long as a character is just extremely brilliant and intelligent and whatever, they can be as big of an asshole as they like without being ever or being hardly criticized for it. And it made me very happy to see the subtle differences in how Sherlock treats people in the BBC show and how Sherlock treats people in this novel. And I think something that is very important when, creating or writing those socially awkward genius type of people is to not mistake social awkwardness for purposeful meanness. The idea that somehow being socially awkward and not good with human-to-human communication or interaction or whatever, and being an absolute asshole and treating other people like shit are somehow the same thing. I think it's just always good to remember that this is not true. These are two completely different things. Social awkwardness does not necessarily mean somebody is purposefully mean to other people and puts them down, and being a person who enjoys making other people feel inferior is not necessarily a result of social awkwardness. I would even argue that the opposite is true, and that to be able to actually successfully make people feel inferior, you have to possess some degree of interhuman expertise, because you need to spot their weaknesses and stuff like this. I will underline what I mean by reading you a quote. There is the scene where Sherlock does his thing and deduces something, and Watson asks, "How in the world did you deduce that?" "Deduce what?" said he petulantly. "Why, that he was a retired sergeant of the Marines." "I have no time for trifles," he answered brusquely. So his first reaction is to be very rude because Watson is kind of interrupting his train of thought. But then it goes on. Then, with a smile, "Excuse my rudeness. You broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well." And then he goes on to explain Watson in a polite manner how exactly he arrived at the conclusion about the retired sergeant of the Marines. And I think this shows very excellently how Sherlock is kind of socially awkward and impulsive and unintentionally impolite, but then he immediately apologizes and goes on to help Watson to follow his train of thought and understand how he arrives at the deduction. And in general, that was something I just really liked about this book, that it showed Sherlock as a brilliant thinker who often, in the distractedness of a train of thought, acted with a certain brusqueness, as it says, or impulsiveness towards other people, but that at the core of his being or at the core of his style of interaction, there was an attentiveness and care towards other people. Hi, it's Rosa from the future, or rather present. I know I don't even look like Rosa from the video anymore. This is what my hair has been doing. So I shot a review in, I think, October or November, and now it's May. So things have happened, time has passed, but I'm trying to catch up with the videos I scripted and didn't shoot, or videos I shot and didn't upload. And I've been just editing this video and I realized what I said about asshole-ish characters might make me seem like somebody who doesn't like asshole characters, and this was not something I want to make you think. I love horrible, irredeemable characters, but there is this very specific trope of character where the asshole-ishness is kind of connected to an assumed geniusness. I would make finger quotes, but I'm holding my tablet. And this is a very specific connection I do not like. I mean, I enjoy watching characters be absolutely horrible to each other. For example, the latest show I really enjoyed is Succession on HBO, and absolutely every single one of the characters is absolutely terrible, and it is a joy to behold. But in the instance of Sherlock BBC, what annoyed me was how everybody was basically falling to their knees in front of his gigantic brain and horrible behavior. And I love it when characters are horrible little shits and everybody knows they are horrible little shits. But in the case of Sherlock, BBC, him being a horrible little shit wasn't seen as exactly that, but his behavior was seen as, or was presented as, a necessary component of being such a big-brained detective kind of person, and this is what specifically annoys me, not the simple fact that sometimes characters are assholes. No, that can be extremely entertaining, and a lot of my favorite characters are assholes. Well, now I think I have used up my right to use the word asshole for this month, so everybody else take a shot. I will have to use other offensive words instead if I want to speak negatively about someone. What I particularly liked about the book is probably the thing I like so much about Victorian literature in general, namely the descriptions of London, especially kind of the squalid rundown areas of London, and I gave you an example in the quote I read out at the beginning of the video. And it was simply very enjoyable to follow Holmes and Watson when their investigations led them to the less fancy parts of London. I'm always here for a good description of an ugly city. And another thing I found especially enjoyable about this book was the description of Sherlock's thought processes. And I can best illustrate this with another quote. And firstly, I have a quote that is just, I think, highly relatable. From long habit, the train of thoughts ran so swiftly through my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being conscious of intermediate steps. And I think this sentence so succinctly describes what I would claim to be an universal human condition. Basically, what I'm saying is #relatable. Another quote of Sherlock which exemplifies why I liked how his train of thought was described is, in solving a problem of this sort, the ground thing is to be able to reason backwards. That is a very useful accomplishment and a very easy one, but people do not practice it much. In the everyday affairs of life, it is more useful to reason forwards, and so the other comes to be neglected. There are 50 who can reason synthetically for one who can reason analytically. And what I really like about this quote is how it demystifies his deductive skills, his reasoning, because it shows that to do what Sherlock does, you do not have to be an especially brilliant genius, but you simply have to train yourself to look at things from a different perspective or from a different direction than you are used to do in your daily life. I'm not a fan of the genius trope in general, and I prefer it much more when exceptional skills are presented as exactly this, skills, something you can learn and practice instead of the simple and magical, this person is just born this way and nobody else will ever be able to reach the level of Sherlockness. My liking of Sherlock as a character in any given adaptations is most often based on the question of whether he is presented as simply an unreachable genius or somebody who has put a lot of work into developing the skills he has. This is what made me so happy when reading this book, that this fulfilled all my expectations and hopes for a good Sherlock characterization. And of course, you could argue that, yeah, Rosa, no surprises here. Of course, this is a good Sherlock characterization because it is an original Sherlock written by Arthur Conan Doyle. But in my life, Sherlock Holmes is much more of a public figure or a public property than something that is only to be found in Arthur Conan Doyle's books. And I, for one, do not just per se invalidate adaptations or fanfictions because they are not written by Arthur Conan Doyle, but I read and enjoy them on the same level that I read the original stories. In general, it was, as I expected, as I probably made clear, an amazing read, perfect for autumn or winter when you just wanna cozy up with a fun crime story with that classic Victorian coziness about it. I probably do prefer the Sherlock Holmes short stories a little bit more, without actually being able to tell you why, but nevertheless, it was an excellent reading experience, and if you haven't read A Study in Scarlet yet, I definitely recommend doing so.